Kamal, I'm looking at a mugshot of Huw Edwards. He has avoided jail over child abuse images, but we're going to be discussing whether that suspended jail sentence is adequate for his crimes.
And we're going to be talking about the Prime Minister and his gifts, not only to him, but to his wife, Lady Victoria, from Lord Ali, a man who made a huge amount of money in the television industry.
And was giving a pass to Downing Street after he made these donations, no less. And as Starmer travels to Italy today to meet with his Italian counterpart, Giorgia Meloni, for tips on stopping the boats, we're going to be discussing immigration and getting our own tips from a former head of the Border Force.
Welcome to the Daily Tea with me, Kamal Ahmed.
And me, Camilla Tominey. Kamal, it's just breaking as we're filming this podcast. Huw Edwards avoids jail over child abuse images. The BBC is appalled by its former presenter's crimes. Edwards has been put on a sex offenders register. That came after he was handed a suspended jail sentence. The judge in the case said there was a medium risk of Edwards reoffending. The court heard that Edwards had paid for pictures and videos, a sum of £1,500 mentioned. So he's avoided jail, Kamal, and he's been sentenced to 6 months imprisonment, suspended for 2 years. He's also been asked to undertake a sex offender treatment programme. He will have to comply with a rehabilitation activity requirement order. I mean, I mentioned the mugshot at the beginning because it is extraordinary, really, to see that main anchor of the 10 o'clock news in a police mugshot and now having narrowly avoided prison.
Absolutely. The Chief Magistrate, District Judge Paul Goldspring, who was a sentencing judge, said that his long-earned reputation, i.e. Huw Edwards, is in tatters. He did say that it does not need saying, but you are of previous good character. And in the hearing this morning, it was said that Huw Edwards was vulnerable when Alex Williams, himself a convicted paedophile, had messaged him offering him these indecent images. Huw Edwards said in court through his barrister that he recognised that he had betrayed the priceless trust and faith of so many people. And obviously he hasn't worked since leaving employment with the BBC. Now, I worked for many years with Huw Edwards, and until this happened, you would not imagine a better colleague. He was someone who anchored the news. I was economics editor and business editor at the BBC, always so supportive. It was my first big broadcasting job. You know, he was a remarkably supportive character. That this double life had been going on for so long, and I think shows the reason why journalism so matters. Tim Davie, the Director General of the BBC, who gave evidence, or who was talking to the House of Lords Committee on Media about the BBC more generally, admitted that this had been tremendously damaging for the reputation of the BBC, but also that they should have been more robust with Huw Edwards once he had actually been arrested, because he was kept on a full salary after arrest, and they've now asked for £200,000 of licence fee payer money back from Huw Edwards. But of course they're on weak legal ground, and Mr. Davie admitted that the BBC should have been more aggressive about how they dealt with Huw Edwards after the arrest.
Yes. I mean, when this mugshot was taken, that was back in November, as you say, Kamal, when he was arrested. We now know that the BBC knew he was accused of serious crimes. He had been suspended on full pay, as is the practice and protocol at the BBC, and indeed, to be fair, other organisations. But at the same time, huge question marks over the decision to give him a pay rise while he was suspended, paying licence fee payers money to Huw Edwards when they knew that he was the subject of such a serious criminal investigation. The other aspect of this, I think people will be looking at, just in light of some of the sentences given to some of the rioters. Let's not forget, the images involved here were Category A, that is the most serious category involving children being sexually abused. And I think people will look at a suspended sentence and appreciate the fact that he didn't have any previous and that he was, until this moment, of good character. But they will look at this sentence being suspended and then perhaps reflect on the 53-year-old grandmother who was caring for her husband when she decided to post an albeit deeply offensive and horrific post during the riots about Muslims and about burning down a mosque, and her getting 15 months behind bars and thinking that something doesn't quite add up here. I'll just say that. So we don't want to be coming down on a ton of bricks on people all the time and being sort of hang them and flog them and lock them up and throw away the key. But there is a disconnect there between some ordinary members of the public having really been treated with the long and hard arm of the law, and then a situation with Edwards where it appears as if he was somewhat protected by the BBC and colleagues who, by the way, came out at the time that The Sun did the first story and criticised that tabloid newspaper for being homophobic and stirring up trouble. We're now where we are. I think people will perhaps think that that sentence isn't harsh enough.
He is still seen as a medium risk of reoffending, which means that, and obviously he'll be on the child sex offenders register now, there will be constraints on what he can do. You have to assume he will never work again, and as the judge said, his reputation was in tatters. I suppose just from a legal point of view, there is a body of law on first sex offences of this kind for previously good character, which has led to suspended sentences. Alex Williams, the other person who was involved in this, the person who sent the images, also got a suspended sentence. So the difference, I think, is that there was less body of law in the issues around aggressive social media posts. I'm not saying I agree with this, by the way, Camilla.
No,
but
I know.
I'm just saying
seems,
yes.
I mean, does it feel weird to you? We have category A images of child pornography being exchanged, and 2 people involved have not gone to jail. We have people during the riots who may have had 1 or 2 too many tweeting or posting on social media, albeit appalling things, and they have been put behind bars.
I suppose the question is, what risk do those posts have for public order, is the argument. But yes.
I mean, what risk do those people pose? I would humbly suggest, in the case of the 53-year-old grandmother who was the sole carer of her husband, compared to a former BBC presenter who's been described as medium risk, that the grandmother would probably pose less risk. But it's a difficult one. We weren't in court. That's just my general feeling about it, I suppose, speaking as a mother. Should we talk about Keir Starmer? I find this absolutely crazy, in the sense that Starmer keeps on falling into the traps that he set himself. So if you position yourself as this paragon of virtue and you spend the whole of your time in opposition having a go, maybe completely legitimately, at the likes of Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak, and for the brief period she was in office, Liz Truss, and talking about chomocracies and how the Tories are always on the take. And then it is discovered that not only has Lord Ali paid for your suits and spectacles, but he's also bought your wife dresses so that she can look nice at conference and in Downing Street and all the rest of it. I mean, it strikes me as thoroughly un-Labour, Kamal.
And possibly it seems that Sir Keir Starmer may have broken the rules, because the fact that gifts were given to Lady Victoria has only been revealed recently, because it appears that possibly, and there'll need to be an investigation into this, he didn't declare everything in the right way. So Lord Ali, the former chairman of the online fashion retailer ASOS, actually made all his money a few decades ago with Planet 24, which is a big breakfast TV franchise for Channel 4. He's estimated to be worth £200 million. He is Keir Starmer's biggest personal donor. The rules say that the Prime Minister is responsible for declarations. He can't blame officials or he didn't know the rules, and he should know that. I believe he's former head of the DPP. Is that right, Camilla? I sometimes forget.
I think his father as well may be a toolmaker. But the irony here is that Starmer himself is a self-styled stickler to the rules, right? He is a rule maker, not a rule breaker. Do you remember when he was in the House of Commons, we referred earlier to Wallpapergate? We had all of those tales about the Johnsons taking money from donors to pay for £840 rolls of wallpaper, which, by the way, the jury's out on whether this wallpaper ever went up. Do you remember how Starmer treated that scandal? Do you remember him coming down on Johnson like a ton of bricks?
Why don't we just hear a bit of that?
It's been widely reported that Lord Brownlow, who just happens to have been given a peerage by the Conservative Party, was asked to donate £58,000 to help repay for the cost of this refurbishment. Can the Prime Minister, if he's so keen to answer, confirm, did Lord Brownlow make that payment for that purpose?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think I've answered this question several times now, and the answer is that I have covered the costs. I have met the requirements that I've been obliged to meet in full, and when it comes to the taxpayer and the costs of number 10 Downing Street, it was the previous Labour government. I think Tony Blair racked up a bill of £350,000, and I think what the people of this country want to see is minimising taxpayer expense. They want to see a government that's focused on their needs and delivering more homes for the people of this country and cutting council tax, which is what we're doing. And it's on that basis that I think people are going to judge our parties on May the 6th.
Keir Starmer.
Answer the question. That's what the public scream at their televisions every PMQs. Answer the question. The Prime Minister hasn't answered the question. He knows he hasn't answered the question. He never answers the question. The Prime Minister will be aware that he's required to declare any benefits that relate to his political activities, including loans or credit arrangements, within 28 days. 28 days, Prime Minister, yes. He will also know that any donation must be recorded in the register of the Minister's interests, and that under the law, any donation of over £500 to a political party must be registered and declared. So the rules are very clear.
The rules are so clear.
Or you could. I'm sort of crawling inside when that's played. When that's played back, you'll sense that he's building a trap for himself. This is actually, though, I think, worse. Now, the reason I say that is because this is about their own attire, their clothing allowance. Boris Johnson is making the argument, as he says Tony Blair made, that these are grace and favour apartments. They need to be done up. If they can be done up by donors rather than the taxpayer, then fine. These are listed buildings for the future. Yes. And the next Prime Minister will have to live there, and the next, and the next, and the next. And they have to be kept at a certain level. Now, this is about Keir Starmer's suits and glasses. One assumes he's not going to be handing his suits on to the next Prime Minister. If it's Kemi Badenoch, they won't fit her. And he's not going to be handing on his spectacles to the next Prime Minister. So this is a more sort of personally, it's a vanity issue about what he looks like rather than buildings which are actually state assets and need to be kept up. So actually, I think this is worse. And you're reminded, aren't you, in that answer, John Major, back to basics. The minute you set, please leave a message after the high moral tone. The minute you set yourself a bar for the public and then you don't reach it yourself, and it looks like he could have broken the parliamentary rules he was just arguing about with Boris Johnson in that clip from Prime Minister's Questions, the public see that. We've led off this podcast on this because, yes, we know immigration is vitally important, has real depth to it. But this really matters. I remember speaking to Lisa Nandy, Camilla, at it was the New Statesman Party, I think, after the election victory. And obviously there was great sort of, they were very pleased. And, you kind of said, OK, you've won, well done. It was only a couple of weeks after the election. And Lisa Nandy saying to me, the culture secretary now, we're like our voters. Isn't that great? That
yes, I remember that.
We are like them. That now suddenly people who came from comprehensive schools and are different. And here's the Prime Minister doing things that is saying, I need special clothing.
Yes.
Even though I'm very well paid, I need special clothing
like in
and
our
special
business.
glasses.
I'm the talent, so I need special trappings. I had to approach this on Sunday on my GB News show with a degree of incredulity, because I can't quite understand why the Prime Minister, or indeed his wife, or anyone around them, doesn't understand how bad this looks. But I was also responding with a degree of incredulity, as I always have, because I cannot understand for the life of me why already rich people in high-profile positions need to have anything for free. I mean, I'm on telly once or twice a week. I buy all of my own dresses. We don't get dressed to do the Daily Tea. Anyway, this was the conversation I had with Paymaster General Nick Thomas Simmons about this farrago.
And this is given added spice, of course, because Lord Ali had a Downing Street pass, and that pass was used so that donors could come to garden parties at Number 10.
Jolly.
Why does a former lawyer earning a six-figure salary need Lord Ali to pay for his glasses and his suits and his wife's dresses? Have you ever allowed another man to buy your wife dresses?
No, not that I'm aware of, Camilla, no. But in terms of being the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and being the Prime Minister's spouse, I think we would agree we would want them to look at their very best of whatever political party they were on the world stage.
Yeah, but this was when he was in opposition partially as well, wasn't it? These donations came in before he was Prime Minister. And
That's
then,
when he was
to make it even more worrying, you've then got Lord Ali having been given this Number 10 pass. Why else would he have been given this pass if it wasn't as a thank you for some of these cash gifts?
Well, to your first point, when the Prime Minister was the leader of the opposition, he's still holding a senior public political office. And obviously he was aspiring to be the Prime Minister and to represent our country on the world stage. To your second point, Lord Ali is a self-made millionaire. He's a long-standing donor. That's a matter of public record to the Labour Party. But he's someone who's been a member of the House of Lords since 1998, has a substantial record of public service in that time, over 25 years in the House of Lords, and was, as I understand it, given a pass for a short period of a few weeks for the transition. But he is somebody who's been in our Parliament for over a quarter of a century.
I mean, it was a bit of a dicey interview, bless him. He'd got the hospital pass. He, along with David Lammy, were trying to justify this on the back of the idea that they're both high profile. But again, I mean...
And David Lammy said to the Laura Kuenssberg show on the BBC on Sunday that these two people had to look their best for the British public. But these people earn over £100,000 a year. I worked for many years on air for the BBC. I was very privileged and very well paid. I bought all my own clothes.
Yes.
And at the BBC, you were not allowed to accept gifts. These are elected people. I just don't understand, as you say, Camilla, what it is about the world they enter. What happens? This is. Do you remember Peter Mandelson, of course? You know, and he got embroiled in all sorts of issues around, you know, what gifts could be received. And I think something happens when you become very powerful, but you're still a public servant.
Yes.
You start hanging out with people who are mega rich. Mega rich people want to know you, want to hang out with you.
Yes.
But your salary is still, although huge in comparison with 99% of the public, is still actually quite small in comparison with them. And it gives them this completely skewed idea of what normal looks like. It says here, we had a look at Lord Ali's donations to him. 29th of April 2024, £2,485 for multiple pairs of glasses. Now,
should have gone to Specsavers.
I wear,
much cheaper. You could get two
glasses,
for 99.
I wear glasses, and I tell you what, I could get a lot of pairs of my glasses for £2,485.
Well, has he got, to be fair, as somebody who is blind as a bat, has he got really complex sight problems? I mean, my glasses, because I am -10 in both eyes, which is really short-sighted, they do cost a lot because I have to get really, really ultra-thin lenses. Otherwise, Kamal, when I'm wearing them, they literally hurt my face because they're so heavy. So I have a bit of sympathy for that. But my glasses, which I paid paid for myself were actually 800 quid. But I mean, how many glasses do you need? And why do you need somebody else to pay for them? Look, the point about this is, just because you can doesn't mean you should. So as a journalist, you get offered all sorts of different incentives and things. And yeah, a couple of times I've gone to the cricket and Betfair have taken us. But, you know, I don't really write stories about betting. It's kind of like it's a kind of a PR and journo thing. These events happen. Tomorrow it's the Conservative Home Garden Party. I shall go along and have an appetiser, shake a few hands, share a bit of gossip. But taking thousands of pounds in clothes and spectacles. Look at this list of freebies.
We went through, as well as Lord Ali's donations, of which there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, totalling £55,000, as we say, clothing, private office costs, glasses and accommodation. Yes, let's go through a few of the Starmer freebies.
So
we also have dug up.
So we have accommodation for 4 people in Gower in Wales, very nice too, £4,500. That's from Crown Hawk Properties, run by a guy called Rod Lloyd, who's a Welsh businessman. We've got endless tickets to the footy.
Endless tickets to the football. And you, of course, are an astonishingly powerful journalist, Camilla. So it's important that, you know, we declare everything that we're taken to as journalists. You don't, though, set policy. There are a number of things here where the person taking them could be affected by policies the government puts in place. There's a row at the moment, Camilla. There's endless about regulators for football.
Right. Yep.
And I've seen there, if you go through the Register of Members' Interests, also a big media company's taking them out. Well, there's an argument at the moment between media companies about podcasts and advertising for the BBC, for example.
Let's just go through a few of the matches. Swansea City versus Bournemouth in 2023. Chelsea versus his precious Arsenal, because he's famously a gunner. A few months later, Newcastle versus Arsenal. Nice work if you can get it. Oh, we've got 4 tickets to the Jingle Bell Ball with hospitality. Value 800. That's from Global, the media company that runs that event. We've got pre-match hospitality in the Chairman's Lounge at West Ham. Hospitality at Norwich City. Let's be having you, Delia Smith might say. Arsenal versus Porto, £3,000. That was given by the Premier League in May.
And 5 tickets. He obviously likes either taking his family or friends. Of course, the famous one more recently was 4 tickets with hospitality to Taylor Swift, donated by the Football Association Premier League Limited.
£4,000. God, but this is the thing, this idea where we are in tune with ordinary people. Ordinary people couldn't get those tickets. He will be turning up front row at Oasis, the next thing we know. Also, Spurs again, 2 tickets in the director's box. Is it that socialists just like free stuff?
I'm not making this into a left-right issue, Camilla, because I think there are a fair number on the right-hand side of this debate.
All right. Let's tot it up.
Naming no names.
No, all right, fair enough. But let's tot it up. 17 grand's worth of football tickets, including many in hospitality. There is an irony there because to be fair as well, I think like all culture secretaries, Lisa Nandy will get to go to stuff. They're then raising concerns about high ticket prices. But I mean, if you've got somebody giving you £1,000 tickets for Taylor Swift or whatever, then you're all right, aren't you? So just let's do the maths on it, Kamal. That's more than £17,000 worth of football tickets, many including hospitality, in the last year alone.
I think the Prime Minister has a different bar than even the Culture Secretary, because the Prime Minister's power is such that he doesn't need to be schmoozed. And I would just give him one piece of advice on things like that. If you set the bar high, which he has, maybe even, because we don't want to be too hair-shirted about it. I mean, for goodness sake, go to the odd football match, maybe fine. Pay for the tickets. Yeah. Yes, ask the Premier League, can I get a couple of tickets to this match or that match? I'll pay. That's a really simple thing to say. Thanks for the tickets, I'll pay for them.
Or, by the way, the great charity called Gig Buddies that take people with special educational needs who wouldn't otherwise get to gigs, football matches and all the rest of it. Get some tickets and give them to a couple of kids who are disadvantaged, who would absolutely dream of seeing Arsenal up close and personal. I just think it's completely out of kilter with this message of sort of gentler, kinder, more compassionate politics.
If he was truly going to turn the page, he needed to change the way that he looks at hospitality for himself and for his wife.
Coming up, how has Europe made such strides stopping illegal migrants coming over the Mediterranean? We're going to explain all next.
Welcome back. Well, Camilla, we're talking again about immigration. The government said before the election this was going to be a big issue. Of course, Rishi Sunak and Stop the Boats, but we've been having as many crossings across the Channel, many of them ending in tragedy and an awful humanitarian effects in 2024 as we had in 2023. So Yvette Cooper has been on the media rounds this morning saying that she's got a new high-powered border force system. And also the Prime Minister has travelled to Italy to meet Giorgia Meloni, the Italian PM, for talks about illegal migration and as well the asylum system. Meloni reached a deal last year to open 2 migrant processing centres in Albania. I don't think they're actually up and running yet, but they've agreed, where she says that 36,000 migrants will be processed each year. Sir Keir Starmer said that Britain could learn lessons from Italy's dramatic fall in migration and was supposedly interested to see how the processing scheme would work.
That decrease is quite stunning, isn't it, Kamal? If you look at the figures, so over the past year, the number of illegal migrants arriving in Italy has fallen from 118,000 to 44,500. That's a decrease of 62%. So she is stopping the boats.
Yes, and there was a really interesting piece in the Telegraph today, which we mentioned at the top of the podcast, by Tony Smith. He was the former Director General of the UK's Border Force, which is obviously there to police our borders with particularly the European Union and France, where a lot of or all of the illegal boat crossings come from across the Channel. And I was so struck by how has Italy done this? And there are a couple of parts of the piece which I'll just read out, how they did the deal. And what happened was that Italy did a deal with Tunisia and Tunisia was paid 105 million euros to boost its border security and to train up its coast guard to improve migrant detection. That was a deal done with Meloni as well as with Ursula von der Leyen, who is the president of the European Commission. And then also, not only is there now a much harsher returns system for Tunisia, also they've done a similar deal with Libya. Libya, pretty much a failed state, has been heavily criticised for its migrant holding facilities, which Tony Smith says are practically prisons. But what has happened is, because people who are coming across the Mediterranean from Libya, where there's industrialised system run by gangs for asylum seekers and illegal migrants, because that deal has been done where people are now returned, it has cut off supply.
But then I don't quite understand this, because as Mr. Smith mentions in this piece, which is headlined, European Union is pushing its mass migration problem in our direction, we've got a situation where we've been paying the French millions to try and police our borders. Most people in response to this crisis say the following: why can't they just go back to France? It's a safe country. Emmanuel Macron, the French president, says, well, this is because this has become an EU competence issue. And because the migrants don't want to end up in France, they want to end up in England, actually we need to kind of let the migrants go in that direction, and it's for you to deal with at Dover. But then conversely, we've got this situation where van der Leyen and Meloni have managed to stitch up these deals with Libya and Tunisia, neither of which, when I last checked, were as safe as France. Where are all the human rights lawyers, by the way, campaigning against this manoeuvre? Because whenever we try and do anything similar, if we try to do this, or indeed Rwanda, it would get tied up in the courts. What's happening? Germany are now, where do Germany want to process people, Kamal?
Yeah, Germany may want to process people in Albania, similar to Italy. So that's the processing of people. And if their asylum claims are agreed, they can then have that asylum in Germany. So it's not like the Rwanda scheme. The Rwanda scheme was you are processed and then stay in
there.
Rwanda if your asylum claim
couldn't people
is...
claim their rights under the European Convention on Human Rights against Germany and Italy and other European nations? Why are we being stopped by our obligations
but
under the ECHR?
I'm not sure we are, you see.
Right.
I think this is part of the argument. It's interesting, isn't it? As you say, we were looking at this morning together, working on this part of the podcast, and Germany has very recently sent back deported people to Afghanistan, and now it wants to do the same for Syria. Now, of course, the European Union is signed up to the convention, the European Convention on Human Rights, but it is still doing that. So it has obviously got derogations to do that. And although there are complaints from refugee groups about returning people to the Taliban, a place where women, for example, are hardly allowed to speak in public, and it's an appalling regime. Syria, completely failed state. We know the war and the danger there. They have simply got on with it. I think there's a big decision for Labour here to make, and Yvette Cooper needs to make it. Are they going to do the type of deal that Italy has done with Tunisia and with Libya and with other countries where deportations will happen? She can't use the fig leaf of, human rights law won't allow us, because Europe has shown that human rights law is not a necessary impediment to action. And this is why I've always been quite critical of, we've got to leave the ECHR. No, you need to set policy, you need to argue it, and you need to get on with it. And Labour's decision, which I think will be very tough for them, and I don't imagine they'll be able to make it, frankly, given Keir Starmer's background in human rights, is that we will do this because stopping the boats is more important.
But where's the criticism of Germany and Italy and indeed Ursula von der Leyen when it comes to obeying your obligations under international law?
Well, there is some.
I mean, this idea that if Britain wants to make some changes to its adherence to the terms of the ECHR, we could have another podcast, frankly, and get Lord Sumption in and discuss how that treaty has changed since it was first conceived of. In fact, you know who talks a good game on this? Tom Tugendhat, who has been more nuanced in his argument about what we need to change about our adherence to the ECHR to make our domestic law work better for us and give it primacy over this treaty. And he cites the example of pulling out of our obligations when it came to prisoner voting rights, because we didn't want to do what everyone else was doing who was subject to that treaty. So I get all that, but why isn't there this outcry? This is going to be down to whether Keir Starmer thinks it's more important actually to be seen as somebody who adheres to the letter of international law, or whether he understands the more sensible political approach, which is to prioritise domestic needs over treaty obligations.
But I think the ECHR is a red herring. I don't think that's the necessary move he needs to make, because the European Union, a signatory, members of the European Union, signatories to the ECHR, are doing these policies with no challenge under ECHR.
We don't know
rules.
about the migrants who have been sent back to Afghanistan and Syria, whether they may challenge this.
I think you're right that there is a need for a political decision on deportation. And are we going to say that we are going to send people back to Libya, back to Tunisia, back to Afghanistan, back to Syria? That's where the debate should be. I don't think the debate is actually around human rights law.
Don't you find it interesting, this Keir Starmer and Giorgia Meloni mashup now? So Rishi Sunak was very close to Meloni. I remember talking to him about his relationship with her at the last Tory party conference. So about a year ago, we were at a Telegraph drinks party, and I'd written some critical columns about him, and that part of the conversation dried up. He said, I get this whole critical friend shtick, but could we have less of the criticism and more of the friendship? I said, all right, if you do stuff that our readers like, we'll reflect that. Anyway, I then moved the conversation swiftly onto Meloni, because they kept on being photographed together, looking at mobile phones and having a giggle. And he basically said, look, we're both the same age. We came into politics at the same time. I'm inherently a Thatcherite and so is she, and that's why we get on. And maybe there's a bit of kind of youthful connection with older statesmen and women around them and all the rest of it. But parts of the Labour Party and the left have castigated Meloni as being this hard right, far right figure. She has massively sanitised the Brothers of Italy party that was associated with her father and forebears, which was a fascist movement, and has made it far more politically and socially acceptable, which is why she's doing well in the polls. However, it's a sticky wicket for Starmer. I mean, he's obviously much more comfortable with the likes of Olaf Scholz, who he met with a couple of weeks ago, than he would be naturally with Meloni.
What is interesting thing about Olaf Scholz? So he leads a coalition of Social Democrats, Greens and Liberals.
Oh, God.
The Germans have started closing their borders, even though there is, of course, the free movement under the Schengen Agreement under the EU, because they are so worried about irregular and illegal immigration into the country. The hard right in Germany is winning election after election.
Yeah.
There's another election this weekend in the state of Brandenburg, where again the AfD, Alternative for Deutschland, the hard right, far right party, is leading in the polls. The point is that whether you're from the left like Scholz or from the right like Meloni, you are having to act.
Yes.
The problem that Labour has is that it is talking, but it needs to decide how it is acting. And it cannot use what I believe has always been a red herring. We can't do anything because of human rights law. They need to be brave is the wrong word, but they need to do something rather than just talk about
Absolutely.
it in the end.
Substance over soundbite as well, which I think soundbites have plagued this issue. Stop the boats, smash the gangs. And the public looks and goes, what are you actually talking about in practical terms? Kamal, let's speak to somebody who has dealt with this in practical terms, because he spent 40 years at the Home Office and then he was the Director General of the UK's Border Force back in 2012. Tony Smith joins us now. Mr. Smith, lovely to have you on the Daily Tea. Where is the UK going wrong where Europe seems to be going right?
Well, yes, hello. It's hard to distinguish right from wrong in this business, really. So maritime rescuing migrants in maritime routes. This is really the topic. Irregular migration. It's happening in the Mediterranean and it's happening in the English Channel, and people are drowning. And so the question is, well, what should we do about that, and who is responsible? So essentially, what I'm saying is that the EU has managed to reduce the number of migrants crossing the Mediterranean into Italy from the North African by 64% in the first 7 months of this year. Those are published by Frontex, the European Border Agency, published figures monthly, which is a significant reduction, whereas the flows across the English Channel from France to the UK are pretty well static. They're not reducing anything like to that extent. So the question is why? I think the Prime Minister's gone to Italy to find out how they've managed to achieve this. Well, I mean, my own view is that they've done a deal essentially with the countries they're leaving. That is mainly Libya and Tunisia. The EU have invested in Coast Guard facilities there to encourage the Libyans and the Tunisians to pick up the migrants in their own waters before they even get to the high seas, let alone Italy, and take them straight back to Libya and to Tunisia. Whereas in their northwestern border with us, it's a different kettle of fish, because essentially the French will not pick up people in their waters or on the contiguous zone between France and the UK on the English Channel, unless they are in dire straits. In other words, they are at the point of drowning, and we know already there have been some very significant tragedies just off the French coast where people have done that. So my challenge really is, what is the EU policy on maritime interventions at sea? Because there seems to be one process going on off the coast of North Africa and another process going off the coast of France, which are inconsistent with one another. Now, under the international law of the sea, the fundamental principle is that everybody who is in distress at sea should be rescued by any vessel that's in the vicinity and then taken back to the nearest safe place, which clearly in the case of France is Calais. But that's not been happening. The French have been for years now escorting essentially dangerous, unseaworthy vessels across to the British territorial waters where they've been taken into the UK. So I'm just challenging that inconsistency, really.
Have you seen anything in the new government's approach, Mr. Smith, which gives you any degree of optimism that we can solve this really appalling problem? As you say, it's a humanitarian disaster, but also there doesn't seem to be any agreement across Europe, and in that I include countries not in the European Union like the United Kingdom, on what is described, a word I don't really like, but what is described as burden sharing. So how we can actually share our responsibilities to give safe refuge to refugees. Has this government done anything new, anything different? It claimed before the election that this is one of the first priorities.
So, I mean, there's a couple of things there. I think the one thing we know they have done is completely write off the Rwanda scheme. In fact, that was written off before they were elected as a gimmick. But they're now talking to the Italians about an offshoring scheme in Albania. There's a difference with offshoring and outsourcing in that there are different outcomes. In that if you do end up qualifying, then you get taken to the country concerned. But whereas in Rwanda, you wouldn't have done unless there was certain routes. I don't want to get into too much technical detail, but essentially, the idea that people can be removed from your territory and placed in another territory where they can be processed, if you like, for asylum, is not a new one. And it's something I think they might have paused a little bit for breath when they took office and had a look at how much work had gone into Rwanda, because, of course, now we will never know how much of a deterrent that would be. But, I mean, both of those schemes are aimed to deter people from crossing. I think. Do you think that?
Sorry, Mr. Smith. Do you think that was a mistake then to get rid of Rwanda so quickly?
Yes, I do. I think it was done for political reasons, which I understand, because Rwanda was opposed by the opposition and by a very significant number of people in the Lords as not being in keeping with international law. So a number of pieces of legislation were put in place by the government over that period, including the Safety of Rwanda Act and also a treaty with Rwanda, which made it very clear that nobody will be persecuted by the Rwandans, or nor will there be any refoulement. Anyone who seeks asylum there can apply for it, but either way, they will not be removed from Rwanda. The only caveat the Rwandans put on all of this is they didn't want any criminals or any terrorists. So we said, well, we'll exclude those then. But all other things being equal, if you are simply a migrant claiming asylum because you don't want to go back to your country where you fear persecution, well, okay, we'll resettle you somewhere else. And that won't be here, though. That will be in Rwanda. That would have, I think, sent a very significant deterrent message. And I think that's broadly what the Italians are trying to do with Albania. So I'm not altogether sure what we're going to learn. I think, actually, for me, the Italian-Albanian deal is kind of a poor man's Rwanda.
Tony Smith, thank you very much indeed for joining us today on the Daily Tea.
Thank you.
So, Camilla, I think two big things. Will the government do a deal with countries which will make many people feel uncomfortable, or will they just keep talking about immigration and asylum seekers and stopping the boats without actually doing something?
If past history is anything to go by, Kamal. Well, it's been lovely to be reunited in the Daily Tea studio. I hope you're not missing your holiday too much. You're back to reality with a bump, and we will be back tomorrow, 5 p.m.